Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, co-founder and chief academic officer here at Newsela, and I use AI as a thinking partner in developing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. So each week on Friday, we do a news roundup of recent stories that have implications for K-12 classrooms. This week, we've got 3 stories that tell you something real about where we are with AI in schools right now. Not so much where the industry says we are, but where we actually are. So first up is Claude for Teachers. Now, we know that Claude launched with much fanfare last week, but also very quickly with a lot of blowback. The basic idea is teachers get a free account and they can upload things, such things as student assessment data, IEP notes, classroom observations, and Claude will help them work with that information. It sounds useful, but there's a huge but. What a district administrator named Joe Phillips called out in his Substack is that Anthropic is encouraging this before they had a district offering ready. Teachers could reasonably believe that the product was designed for them to upload student data. The company said it was FERPA compliant, built with student data in mind, so teachers acted on that. The problem is that teachers aren't privacy attorneys. When a company tells them something is safe with student information, they assume the workflows are approved. But from a district's perspective, if an unapproved application received protected student data, that's a data breach. Full stop. The district has to investigate, determine scope, notify parents, figure out if data can be deleted. Phillips' point was very direct. Governance isn't something you add later as an enterprise feature. It's the foundation upon which you build. You don't launch teacher adoption and then walk into the district office asking them to buy the governance layer. That's backwards. There's historical context that's useful here. Up until around 2013, EdTech products typically arrived into districts via the central office. They were purchased by administrators who were interested mostly in the quality of the data that they could provide on student learning. A new wave of products, including Newsela, showed that adoption could be driven bottoms up from the classroom to the building leader and then to the district. This week's story is a reminder that EdTech products working with student data need to be mindful that their approach to product adoption doesn't undermine their own efforts. Now, it's not the first time we've seen this pattern either. About a decade ago, there was a project called InBloom. It was backed by Gates and Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. The idea was simple: create a centralized place where schools could store and share student data so teachers and administrators could use it to improve instruction. It made sense in theory. Teachers wanted better data access, schools wanted better tools, but InBloom launched without getting district buy-in first. Parents and educators realized that they had no real say in what data was being collected, who had access, or how it could be used. A lack of governance, as it was this time with Claude, was then, with InBloom, a big problem. InBloom shut down in 2014 after less than a year. What's happening now with Claude for Teachers follows the same pattern. Anthropic launched teacher accounts, encouraged teachers to upload student data, said it was FERPA compliant, and then promised that a district offering would come later. It's the same mistake that governance was considered an afterthought. But of course, we know that it can't be the feature you add once teachers have already adopted the tool. It has to come first, and InBloom taught us that lesson 10 years ago. Second story is on laptop shortage. I thought this was particularly interesting as it started to connect some dots that I don't think I otherwise would have expected to see. Here's what's happening with school devices right now. A few years back, a lot of districts decided to go all in on one-to-one Chromebooks. Every student got their own laptop. It was supposed to transform learning. But by 2022, schools started to realize that the experiment wasn't working the way they'd hoped. Kids were getting distracted. There were video games, YouTube, online bullying through Google Docs and Gmail. Teachers were spending much more time policing devices than actually teaching. After spending billions on school tech, studies started to show that it hadn't actually improved student learning or graduation rates. So some districts started pulling back. For example, McPherson Middle School in Kansas pulled Chromebooks entirely in January, moved them onto carts. Now it uses them sparingly only for specific tasks. Schools in North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Michigan started doing the same thing. This decision was already underway, and educators were already questioning whether one-to-one devices were worth it, when in December, Micron Technology, a chip manufacturer, announced that they were exiting the consumer market entirely to supply AI data centers. And suddenly, Chromebook prices jumped. In 8 months, a laptop that cost $800 jumped to more than $1,300. That's a 64% increase. Now 2 things are colliding. Districts that wanted to pull back can justify it economically, but districts trying to keep one-to-one programs are going to get crushed. They're buying refurbished devices, they're switching to MacBooks and locking in prices, and they're leasing instead of owning. Economic pressure is forcing decisions that should be about learning into decisions about what can be afforded. And unless AI data centers stop expanding, this pressure is not going away. Third story takes us to Y Combinator and what I would call the dream of the AI tutor. Y Combinator, an incubator for startups, is recruiting startups to build new products around AI tutors. The pitch is one that we've heard before, which is that every child gets a patient adaptive tutor that grows with them over the years, teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, eventually teaching them how to think and reason. Now the dream has a name. It's called the Primer, after Neil Stephenson's novel called The Diamond Age. Briefly, The Diamond Age is set in a near-future world with advanced nanotechnology. The core plot follows a young girl named Nell who gets access to a book called The Primer, an interactive AI-assisted educational device that adapts to her needs and teaches her everything from basic literacy to critical thinking and life skills. The Primer is essentially the fantasy version of a perfect personalized tutor. It responds to the reader, it adjusts the difficulty, knows exactly what the student needs to learn next, and somehow produces exceptional outcomes. This is science fiction from 1995, but it's become a reference point for everyone chasing AI tutoring. When Y Combinator says the Primer is starting to feel possible with AI, they're invoking that fantasy, the fantasy of a single device that can educate any child perfectly, tailored entirely to them. The irony is that the book is actually a bit more skeptical about technology solving education than the people who cite it. But the fantasy of the Primer persists. And according to YC, it's finally starting to feel possible because of AI. It's not a new dream. Benjamin Bloom published his research on one-on-one tutoring decades ago. The gap between that research and what's actually possible has always been enormous, and that gap hasn't changed. What we're seeing now is only the latest manifestation of the technology fantasy that AI tutors can provide even a fraction of the solution that the humans behind Bloom's research were able to provide. So to sum up the week, one company's go-to-market strategy is struggling because they didn't think through governance. Schools are choosing between refurbished devices and locking in prices because chip supply is being redirected. And 3, the industry is still funding a version of AI in education that doesn't exist yet and which we've seen fail to live up to its promise again and again. Tell me how you're experiencing this past week. Has device cost and availability actually affected what you can do in your classroom, what you're planning to do for the coming school year? What would change if companies had to get district buy-in before asking teachers to adopt a new technology? As always, I'd love to know your thoughts. Please share or read everything that you write. And that's the week in review. We'll see you on Monday with a new story. Have a great weekend, everybody.